It's a real privilege today to welcome Katie Farris and Ilya Kaminsky to Amherst College's 2024 LitFest. This is the ninth year of LitFest, and it's a wonderful partnership between the Center for Humanistic Inquiry, the Common Magazine, the college's Office of Conferences and Special Events, the Emily Dickinson Museum, the President's Office, and this year, the Jones Library as well. We're grateful for the support and participation of colleagues all across the college, especially the English Department, President Michael Elliott and his office, and for the support of the Croxton Lecture Fund. And also a big thank you to the National Book Foundation. So Emily Dickinson once said, over the years, her lexicon was her constant companion. And that lexicon defined phosphorescence as a faint light or luminousness of a body unaccompanied with sensible heat. So to Dickinson, this phosphorescence was something shimmering, something that could not be pinned down. It was transformative. And in her own language, it elevated plain print to italics, prose to poetry, and facts to real knowledge. In fact, it's once said that she panned the work of an acquaintance, saying that they have the facts but not the phosphorescence of learning. So imagine being the subject of that deflating comment. So at a festival dedicated to illuminating great writing, here we are with two remarkable poets whose work glows with phosphorescence, Ilya Kaminsky and Katie Farris. Ilya was born in Odessa in the former Soviet Union, now Ukraine. He arrived in the United States in 1993 when his family was granted asylum. He's the author of Deaf Republic and Dancing in Odessa, co-editor and co-translator of many other books and anthologies. He lost most of his hearing at the age of 4 after being misdiagnosed with a cold rather than the mumps. Deaf Republic is a poetic drama in 2 acts that opens with the shooting of a deaf boy in a public square by the occupation soldiers. In protest, the townspeople go deaf or adopt deafness as a tactic of resistance and organize their dissent through puppetry and sign language. Deaf Republic was a finalist for the National Book Award and won the Los Angeles Times Book Award, the Anisfield Wolf Book Award, the National Jewish Book Award, the Whiting Award, the American Academy of Arts and Letters Metcalf Award, and Poetry Magazine's Levinson Prize. It's had just an enormous impact. Ilya Kaminsky has also received a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Lannan Fellowship, an Academy of American Poets Fellowship, and an NEA Fellowship. He was co-founder in the late 1990s of Poets for Peace, and currently he teaches in Princeton, New Jersey. Katie Farris is a poet, a writer of hybrid forms, and a translator. Her most recent book is Standing in the Forest of Being Alive, which Publishers Weekly named one of the top 10 books of 2023. She's also the author of the chapbooks A Net to Catch My Body in Its Weaving, which won the Chad Walsh Poetry Award from Beloit Poetry Journal. Also 13 Intimacies and Mother Superior in Hell. Her earlier collection is Boys, Girls, a kind of a hybrid form book. Her awards include the Pushcart Prize, Orison Prize, and Anne Halley Prize from the Massachusetts Review. She also is the award-winning translator of several books of poetry from French, Ukrainian, Chinese, and Russian. In addition to her poetry and translations, Farris writes prose about cancer, the body, and its relationship to writing. Standing in the Forest of Being Alive is a memoir, or perhaps a journal, of poems written while Katie was dealing with treatment for breast cancer at an alarmingly young age, at a time of isolation because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the political chaos of the January 6th assault on the Capitol. She also lives and teaches in New Jersey, and just to make it clear, Katie and Ilya are married to each other. So our guests will, what we'll do today is our guests will read from their work, and then we'll have a conversation, and ask for your questions. Ilya's poems can be accessed by the QR code on the card in your seat. If you don't have that QR code, please see if a neighbor has it or raise your hand. We also have numerous copies of the poems printed out. So if you would like to have those poems, raise your hand and they'll come to you in your seats. Also, yes, of course, we really want to take your questions. So most helpful will be for you to write your questions on the cards provided. They'll be collected and passed up here to the stage so that we can share them with our guests. And also, because we're going to do it that way, please keep legibility in mind as much as you can. Let's see, copies of their books are available for sale on the table near the entrance, and after the program, they'll be happy to sign books for you. And the book signing table is also at the back. So join me in welcoming Ilya Kaminsky and Katie Farris, and Ilya will read for us first.
Thank you so much for this very, very kind introduction and for welcoming us here with such generosity. It's really wonderful to be back in this town. And I want to thank the students from yesterday, which were absolute delight to chat with about poems and metaphors specifically. As you might have noticed it by now, I speak with a very heavy accent. The idea is that by the end of this 72 hours that we spent together, you will all speak with a very heavy accent. But just in case there looks like more handouts available, or you will be able to follow on your phone, I recommend it, otherwise you will fall asleep. Okay. So without much further ado, since we only have 72 hours after all, I will read some poems, okay? Can you follow, okay? Yes. All right. The first one is called We Live It Happily During the War. We live it happily during the war. And when they bombed other people's houses, we protested, but not enough. We opposed them, but not enough. I was in my bed. Around my bed, America was falling. Invisible house by invisible house by invisible house. I took a chair outside and watched the sun. In a 6 month of a disastrous reign, in a house of money, in a street of money, in a city of money, in a country of money, our great country of money. We, forgive us, lived happily during the war. So, the few poems I'll read are pages from Deaf Republic, which is a story in verse about a pregnant woman and her husband who at a public gathering see a soldier shoot and kill a young deaf boy. And in response to that murder, they see the whole community decide to stand up and protest the authorities by refusing to hear them. Okay? Deaf Republic, gunshot. Our country is a stage. When soldiers march into town, public assemblies are officially prohibited. But today, neighbors flock to the piano music from Sonia and Alfonso's puppet show in Center Square. Some of us have climbed up into trees, others hide behind benches and telegraph posts. From Petya to that boy in the front row sneezes. The sergeant puppet collapses, shrieking. He stands up again, snorts, shakes his fist at the laughing audience. The army jeep swerves into the squad, disgorging a servant sergeant. Disperse immediately! Disperse immediately. The puppet mimics in a wooden falsetto. Everyone freezes except Petya, who keeps giggling. Someone claps a hand over his mouth. The sergeant turns toward the boy, raising his finger. You! The puppet raises a finger. Sonia watches her puppet. The puppet watches the sergeant watches Sonia and Alfonso, but the rest of us watch Petya limp back, gather all the speed in his throat, and launch it at the sergeant. The sound we do not hear leaves the gulls of the water. As soldiers march, Alfonso covers the boy's face with a newspaper. 14 people, most of us strangers, watch Sonia kneel by Petya shot in the middle of the street. She picks up his spectacles, shining like 2 coins, balances them on his nose. Observe this moment, how it convulses. The snow falls, and the dogs run into the streets like medics. 14 of us watch Sonia kisses his forehead. Her shadow whole torn in the sky. You shimmer the park benches, porch lights we see. In Sonia's open mouth, the nakedness of the whole nation. She stretches out beside the little snowman napping in the middle of the street, as picking up its belly the country once. Alfonso, in snow. You're alive, I whispered to myself. There is for something in you listens. Something that runs down the street, falls, fails to get up. I run, etc. with my legs and my hands behind my pregnant wife, etc. Down Wasinka Street I run, etc. It only takes a few minutes, etc. to make a man. Daphnis and insurgency begins. Our country woke up next morning and refused to hear soldiers. In the name of Petya, we refuse. At 6 a.m., when soldiers compliment the girls in the alleyway, the girls slide by, pointing to their ears. At 8, the bakery door is shut and soldiers see Ivana face, though he is their best customer. At 10, Mama Galia shouts, "No one hears you!" at the gates of the soldiers' barracks. By 11 a.m., arrests begin. Our hearing does not weaken, but something silent in us strengthens. After curfew, families of the arrested had homemade puppets out of their windows, the streets empty, but for the squeaks of strings on the tap against the buildings, of wooden fists and feet. In the ears of the town, snow falls. Alfonso stands answerable. My people, you were really something fucking fun. On the morning of the first arrest, our men once frightened, bound to their beds, now stand up like human musts. of new species through us like a police whistle. Here the night testify, each of us comes home, shuts at the wall, at the stove, at the refrigerator, let himself forgive me. I wasn't honest with you. Life, to you, I stand answerable. I ran, etc. With my legs and my hands, etc. Ran down wasn't a tree, etc. Whoever listened sent you. For the Father and my tongue sent you, for our argument that end sent you. For deafness, Lord, such fire from a match you never lit. That map of bone and open it valves. I watched the sergeant pain, the deaf boy take iron and fire in his mouth, his face on the asphalt, that map of bone and open it valves. It is the air. Something in the air wants us too much. The earth is still. The devil guards it, cucumber sandwiches. This first day soldiers examine the years of bartenders, accountants, soldiers. The wicked in silence dust to soldiers that their girls fly from her bed like a door off a bus. Observe this moment. How it convulses. The body of the boy lies on the asphalt like a paperclip. The body of the boy lies on the asphalt like the body of a boy. I touch the walls, feel the pulse of the house. An history of wordless and do not know why I am alive. We tiptoe the city, Sonia and die between zitars and guardians on our iron gates. Be courageous, we say, but no one is courageous. At the sound we do not hear live the birds of the water. Before the war, we made a child. I kissed a woman whose freckles arose the neighbors. She had a mole on her shoulder, which she displayed like a medal for bravery. Her trembling lips might come to bed. Her hair would have fallen in the middle of the conversation and come to bed. I woke in my barber shop of those. Yes, I even her off to bed on the chair of my hairy arms. But parted lips, my parted lips lying under the cushions. Sonia, the things we did. Soldiers aim at us. Soldiers aim at us. They fire. The crowd of women flees inside the nostrils of searchlights. My God, have a photograph of this. In the piazza's bright air, soldiers drag Petya's body and his head bang the stairs. I feel through my wife's shirt the shape of our child. Soldiers drag Petya up the stairs and homeless dogs in as philosophers understand everything and bark. I now on a bridge with no camouflage of speech. A body wrapping the body of my pregnant wife. Tonight, we don't die and don't die. The earth is still a helicopter I above my wife. On earth, a man cannot flip a finger at the sky because each man is already a finger flipped at the sky. Now the story goes on, but I'll just read one small poem that follows and get out of your hair, okay? This one is called Lullaby. Lullaby. Little daughter, rainwater, snow and branches protect you. Whitewashed walls and neighbors' hands. Oh, child of my Aprils, little earth of 6 pounds, my white hair keeps you sleep lit than you.
Hello, friends. Okay, now I'm official. Thank you so much to all of you here. I agree, it's been just a really wonderful experience being able to spend time with the faculty, the students, the interns at the magazine. I'm trying to remember everybody's name. I know I'm going to forget somebody, but Olive and Kay and Susan and Sophie. And then there was one more. Yeah, yes, Emily. Chosen totally at random, had nothing to do with the fact that I can see Emily Dickinson's face from here. All right, so I'm going to be reading from my not quite so new book, Baby, anymore. She's almost a year old now. Aw. Still making a mess, still keeping me up at night. And the book follows, as Jane so kindly sort of mentioned, it starts in about August 2020 when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and it kind of follows through about the time of radiation and then the sort of uncertainty that comes after. Usually I have a kind of a set list that I use at readings, about a 20-minute long set list, and then when I was sitting here I thought, oh, this is so close to Emily Dickinson's house, and Jane works at Emily Dickinson's house, so I had to pull all the Emily Dickinson poems out. So it's a little chaotic. I've never read this order exactly before, so I hope you will bear with me as I'm trying something new today. But luckily it starts the same. This is called Why Write Love Poetry in a Burning World? To train myself to find in the midst of hell what isn't hell. The body bald, cancerous, but still beautiful enough to imagine living, the body washing the body, replacing a loose front porch step, the body chewing what it takes to keep a body going. The scene has a tune, a language I can read, a door I cannot close. I stand within its wedge, a shield. Why write love poetry in a burning world? To train myself in the midst of a burning world, to offer poems of love to a burning world. This is called Tell It Slant, which is, of course, a reference to Emily Dickinson's advice, which is to tell the truth, but tell it slant. The word spiculated just means spiky. It's like at a certain point in your doctorly education, like you get enough degrees, you're allowed to just add random syllables. You know what I mean? Anywhere you want, just stick another syllable in it. So, tell it slant. You float in the MRI gloam, several spiculated masses. I name you cactus, carcinoma be damned. You make a desert of all of me. Have I said it slant enough? Here's a shot between the eyes. 6 days before my 37th birthday, a stranger called and said, "You have cancer, unfortunately," and then hung up the phone. I had the kind of miraculous experience of writing an op-ed for the New York Times. I did not realize how thoroughly fact-checked these things are, but oh my God, I think they called my kindergarten teacher. They went everywhere, and one of the things they could only confirm with me was the nature of that phone call. The editor called up and said, "It surely wasn't that abrupt," and I was like, "Actually, you're right." Afterward, I said, "Do you have any more information?" And they said, "No, someone will be in contact with you in the next 2 weeks, and then hung up the phone. So I think I actually softened the blow in the poem itself. It was a tough time. It was, let's not think too much about August 2020, but a tough time for doctors. This is called In the Event of My Death, and the cover of the book this was my braid and my arm holding it, so that's sort of the central image of the poem, In the Event of My Death. What used to be a rope descending my vertebrae to the basement of my spine grows thin. In solidarity with my first chemotherapy, our cat leaves her whiskers on the hardwood floor. I gather them, each pure white parenthesis, and plant them in the throat of the earth. In quarantine, I learned to trim your barbarian hair. Now it stands always on end, a salute to my superior Barbary skills. In the event of my death, promise you will find my heavy braid and bury it. I will need a rope to let me down into the earth. I've hidden others strategically around the globe, a net to catch my body in its weaving. So now beginning with my Emily Dickinson tribute. This is called A Row of Rows. We argue on the front porch, whose turn is it to lecture the other? Fruit salad or steak? And was Whitman or Dickinson the greater epic poet? We argue, Whitman, about the ripeness of bananas, the rawness of the meat, and whether it's okay to throw apple cores in the street. I hold it is not. A pleasant row of rows, little tugs on the strings of our love, just enough to pull our days taut. This is called, it's a very long title, Finishing Emily Dickinson, First Deacon in William Blake's Church of the Marriage of Heaven and Hell in the Oncologist's Waiting Room. So this is the day that I actually went in to talk to the doctors about my cancer. I happened to have Emily Dickinson's complete poems, the newest version. I forget the editors, but it is a giant volume, and I was finishing it. I'd been reading it since February. And actually finished it, in that waiting room. That's right. Oh, Emily, goodbye. We met in February and parted in July. I meet your sweet velocity in everything that flies, in mote and star and sphere, in bird and phosphorus of God. Oblique, you preached obliquity, your body steeple for the church of mystery, your bell rings on beyond. So, many, many moons ago when I wrote my first book, I wrote it in kind of prose poetry form. And that is, I consider my primary form is prose poetry, so I never break a line. And at some point I realized if I wanted to write traditional poems, I'd have to figure out how to break a line, and I did not know how to do that, so I decided to learn meter, because then I would know where you had to break the line. It's like you get 5 feet and then you have to break the line, thank God. I don't have to make that choice. And around that time, I started reading Emily Dickinson and reading her ballad meter, her very famous alternating trimeter and tetrameter lines. Nerdy stuff, I know, but so much of this book was written in that meter. And so much of it was really buried in Emily Dickinson is the ghost that haunts this book. So here's the original title for the book was Emeloma, which is a terrible title. It's awful, but I couldn't separate the ideas. So it's, Emily and then Oma as in like a solid mass, sometimes cancerous, sometimes not. But that's what we called it. Thank God people talked me out of that. But there's one poem still that has that title. So this is called Emeloma, A Riddle and an Answer. Will you be my death, breast? I had asked you in jest, and in response you hardened. A test of my resolve, malignant, magnificent palimpsest. Will you be my death, Emily? Today I placed your collected poems over my breast, my heart knocking fast on your front cover. Will you be my death, chemo? The shell of myself in the sphere of time, plucking the wool of my hair from its branches. Will you be my death, Emily, and keep the sky from reaching inside? You, the voice, me, the faithful echo. Will you be my death, echo? Do you know? No. In which meadow mow? The ginkgo grows, goes. Which is fallow, which furrowed, foes. What is winnowed, what is woe? This kind of has a long gloss, and it's a short poem. So there's a wonderful poet, Tamas Shalamun, who Ilya is actually writing an introduction for a new translation of his right now. He is what we affectionately call a poet's poet, which is to say he's very strange. And poets go to him over and over because he has this incredible explosive energy. And most people who are not poets have the experience of, huh? Which is, to be fair, also the experience poets have, but also, wee! So he once said that in one of his poems, that Giotto, the painter, used his sketches of sheep in order to model his angels when he painted them. Okay, you know, I've looked at his paintings since I do not find his angels particularly sheepish or sheepy, but I guess it must be true if Tamas Shalamun said it in the sense of a poetry fact. A poetry fact, you may not be able to take it to the bank, but it's true on some level, you know. Okay, second important piece, Jonah is from the Christian Bible, Old Testament. Jonah was a prophet who he did not like the gig. It was dark. It was pretty freaking dark. And so he decided to run away. He got on a ship. There was a terrible storm. He fell off the boat. A whale swallowed him like they do. But apparently they do, because a few years ago, do you remember seeing there was a person who actually did get swallowed by a whale, kind of like Jonah? Anyway, so he, in the belly of the whale, made peace with his gig, and the whale vomited him up. So, happy story. And finally, ambergris. Ambergris, if you're ever walking down the beach, actually, I don't know if it would happen on the East Coast, but yes, it would. If you're walking down the beach and you find this grayish, yellowish lump, it doesn't look like much, but it smells like the most amazing thing you've ever smelled in your life. Give me a call, we'll split the proceeds. You have found ambergris, which is one of the most precious and rare perfumery ingredients. It also happens to be whale vomit. That's true, and one of Shalamun's books is actually titled Ambergris, which I did not know before yesterday. Whale vomit, yeah, I think that's everything. Okay. Oh, that's a real fact, too. That's a real fact. That's not a poetry fact. All right. This is called A Week Before Surgery, I Practice My Body. Like Giotto's angels, sketched from his studies of sheep, I open the jaws of my back to the sky, eating my body deeper into this blue. Like Jonah, vomited from the whale, fragrant as ambergris, or plain as any woman who, a week before mastectomy, practices being opened. I don't think I've ever read this poem out loud. It is an homage to one of Emily's poems. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna lose the title. Ooh, that's embarrassing. My Life a Loaded Gun. Is that it? My Life It Stood a Loaded Gun. Thank you. I knew I missed part of it. Okay. And this is, so my mastectomy was on January 11th, which was about the peak of COVID deaths in America in the history of the pandemic before or since. And 5 days before that, there was the riot at the Capitol. So this is 5 days before the mastectomy, insurrection at the Capitol. What is the door the bullet makes in the body? America the gun, predictable, mechanical, possessed of several chambers. If I reside right by your side, must I expect your dangers? Who holds you holstered, America the gun? What is the door the bullet makes in the body? What do we call it? Body? Another one I don't think I've ever read. This is called Scheduling the Bone Scan. So Depending on, every cancer is slightly different. Mine, I got chemotherapy before my surgery. And after the surgery, during the surgery, they perform something called a sentinel node biopsy. And basically, this finds out if your cancer has spread beyond the local region. And prior to that, MRIs, visualizations sometimes can see if a cancer has spread into lymph nodes, and sometimes it cannot, especially with my type of cancer, invasive lobular carcinoma, which makes kind of little threads instead of lumps. So it's very hard to see on scans. So they perform the sentinel node biopsy, and it turns out my cancer had spread pretty extensively from the breast into the lymph nodes. And after that, I received a bone scan and a PET scan, the first two scans, to determine whether or not the cancer had spread beyond the sort of the region of the body into the rest of the body, which would have made it a stage 4 eventually terminal but untreatable cancer, basically. So this was about making that phone call, scheduling the bone scan. The word bone tolls in your ear a bell. What tolls? The word, the bone. The drum in your ear moves the hammer like a lever. A bone moves the word bone through your ear. You repeat bone, your voice droning, not silver, bronze, a duller thud, nothing ringing, instead a buzz, the devouring sound, the insect, time. And finally, so we've kind of gone through chemo, surgery, and then I finished radiation, or I was at the end of radiation. I had like 2 more days left. You go in every single day for like 30 days in a row, except for weekends. And it's by the end, especially if you've done the full rigmarole of, chemo, mastectomy, radiation, you're getting pretty tired. And that day, so a funny thing, at least at my particular institution, like you walk in the door, there are like 4 people you may have never met before preparing where you're getting the radiation, and you just whip your shirt off. Like I'm walking down the hallway to the room at this point because I've been doing it so long, I'm already whipping my shirt off. I walk in to throw it on the chair, and my doctor, my oncologist, my radiation oncologist is standing there, and I was like, I didn't expect you to be here. It's not a good sign. And she was like, I got to tell you, we did the scan and there's a thing and we don't know if it's cancer or not. We can radiate it more. And if we choose to radiate it more, it's going to be kind of tricky. I had some quite extensive nerve damage in the course of my mastectomy. And she said, well, if we continue to radiate it, basically you're going to have problems with your arm because the radiation needs to go through every major nerve and muscle in your arm. I can't tell you, that might just be a little bit of stiffness, and it might literally feel like your arm is on fire for the rest of your life. It might happen immediately. We're within the first week after radiation. It might happen 20 years from now. We really have no way of knowing. And on the other hand, if we don't treat it and it does turn out to be cancer, you can't get any more radiation at this point because you've been basically over-radiated. We cannot perform surgery because of where it is and because your skin is so delicate post-radiation. And because the chemo, unfortunately, also gave me heart failure, I could not do any more chemo. So functionally, it would be untreatable. So what do you want to do? And one of the things I have grown to appreciate about this doctor, there is a lot of unknown in the medical field, a lot of unknown. And although we go to it expecting answers, a lot of times those questions are posed back to us. And we're forced to think about what we value and what we want. And sometimes doctors will take those decisions out of your hands. And traditionally, they've been taught to do that, But this doctor had a lot of humility, and she came to me and basically said, I said, what would you do? And she said, I've been up all night thinking about it, and I really don't know. To me, this is such a 50-50 question. You really have to make that choice for yourself, and I am grateful for that. So this is called To the God of Radiation, and it's about trying to make that decision. Given the unexpected choice between uncertain death and certain damage, I find in the mirror a woman, breastless, burned, who, in an advisory capacity, asks, "How much do you want to live? Enough? O God of radiation, let your light like a ship pass through me, your radiance exposing what's inside me like film a god takes. But must you clutter the eaves of my scapula, scurry the grasshopper nest of my heart, scythe my nerves, and cobweb my muscles to the rungs of my ribs? How much more can one body take? Enough. Light every deadly cell like a wick, burning in the paper lantern of my chest, a thing so ephemeral, yet held so firmly in your fist." Thank you.
Thank you so much for those two amazing, powerful readings. What's it like in your house when, you're both composing and reading this
In our
way?
house, it's very simple. One sentence. Katie is a superior poet.
I think, is that on? Can you hear me? Okay, good. It's funny because we write very differently. Ilya composes with pieces, and I try to start with finished, very imperfect poems and then strengthen them. So we do things very differently, but one thing we both do is read aloud a lot when we're writing poems, and our offices are both on the same floor, and occasionally it's like, "Shut up!" "No, you shut up." There is a lot of like cross stream, and I wonder sometimes about what that does to poems occasionally, because I'm listening to his rhythms, while I'm trying to keep mine going. So I also have a noise canceling headphones, which is very helpful.
Well, also, we have two cats and they worry, so they come consoling.
Especially when Ilya's reading, because it's intense, so
Yeah.
they're like, huh, what's happening?
So staying with the household just for a moment, with Rose of Rose, who won, Whitman or Dickinson?
In my opinion, and I love Dickinson. Ilya gets a question in his mind, and he will ask anybody, including the male person or my father, who almost came here today, who has never probably read a poem in his life, I guess. Maybe mine, I don't think so, though. Don't you think Emily Dickinson is an epic poet? So he won,
all the chapbooks
and I
that she
won.
made, all the fascicles, they are kind of based on Stations of the Crows, and they are there to signify an epic journey, symbolically.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's this kind of big debate has been about what is the unit of her poem. Is it a poem? Is it the fascicle? Are the fascicles really an arc? Yeah. I want to ask you, Katie, first. So this cancer journey is just incredible, and I'm sure there are people in this room, including me, who have been sort of on the same thing. And when I saw the title of your book, Standing in the Forest of Being Alive, in a way that kind of says it all to me. I remember sort of having been through radiation chemosurgery. I was in the dentist's office, and the dentist complained that, some of this chemo drug that you're taking, it's not really good for your teeth. And that was just infuriating, right? So there's this forest. It's a thicket that you can get lost in. It's also a place of beauty and wonder. Can you talk a little about how that your experience of sort of how that works for you?
That's a lovely question, and I have not been asked it before. I think there are a couple, certainly there was a there was a Dante sort of reference there. There's also, I was in Atlanta through the course of this, and Atlanta is in the middle of an enormous, beautiful hardwood forest. And as a person I grew up a little bit north of here in New Hampshire, and I love trees, and I grew up in the midst of a forest as well, but primarily softwood, or mixed as it is here, not these incredible tulip poplars, which are unbelievably tall. And I think, I was spending a lot of time walking and hiking in the earlier part of the pandemic, right before I was diagnosed. And Atlanta's a fascinating city. There are all these little pocket parks and tiny little spaces of wilderness kind of marbled into what is otherwise quite a busy and large kind of a city that has outgrown itself. So I think, and of course the symbolism of the tree, the renewal, I was diagnosed, and I had chemotherapy through the course of the late fall into the winter. Like, I finished the day before, I think it was like Christmas Eve or something. It was like just right before Christmas that I finished chemo. And so I had this feeling of, my hair falling out as the leaves were falling. I don't know, it felt cyclical. It felt like part of the journey. So I don't know, those are just some connections I had. It just kind of came out.
The final poem in the book.
Sure, and there's the final poem of the book, which I think I'll read in closing, is also very much about uncertainty, because as the book was coming out, there was still a lot of unanswered questions, and even now, I mean, it's the nature of having had cancer, especially one that is difficult to see, where my cancer it very well could already be spread and growing, and there's just no way of knowing that until it's quite advanced. And so I don't know, something about the uncertainty of it became wrapped up into Forest, and
Yeah. Sort of a question for both of you is, in Deaf Republic and in Standing in the Forest, Katie, there's so much difficulty and trauma, and there's also moments of beauty, love poems, all of this wrapped up into daily life. I mean, it's really you go through bad things and you appreciate the good things that come along with them. As poets, how do you sort of make those choices in constructing, what those moments are and where they go in a sort of narrative?
I just talked. You talk. Your turn.
Okay. I'll do as you say. I have a strange relationship to the word trauma. I mistrust it simply because we all come in this particular space crying. Is there any person you know who arrived on this planet without a howl? Allen Ginsberg didn't make up that word, he just stole it from babies. At the same time, as soon as you howl, you're like, oh, mama, hi, I want a hug. Literally. So how do we organize a narrative about this? I go to Ukraine pretty often. Since the war started, I have been 3 times. The last time less than a month ago. Children are born, their weddings, their birthday parties. At night there is a bombardment. In the morning my uncle calls me. Let's go out. Let's go to a restaurant. And I'm like, should we have a conversation about what happened last night? And he's like, no, you know what we should have a conversation about? And I'm like, what? And he's like, so some people have to go to work in the morning. You get the point? Yeah. I mean, after a while, people just need to go on living no matter what is happening. We don't have a choice. We got to make those sandwiches.
I'm going to take a slightly different tack to that, just in terms of craft, thinking about craft, which is, as I was writing this book, I was writing the poems very much as everything was happening. Like I would have a chemo treatment, and then within it was every 2 weeks. So usually after about a week, I was feeling okay, especially earlier on. And I would work on a poem for 4 or 5 days, and right before I'd go in for my next treatment, I would post like a poem and a little update and a selfie, something like that. That happened, I don't know, within the first 3 or 4 weeks probably of starting chemo. I started doing this as a practice, and surprisingly, a community sort of emerged around that, which is a really beautiful thing for me, especially at that point. I couldn't see anyone. Nobody could see anyone, but I especially couldn't see anyone because I was so immune compromised. There wasn't a vaccination yet. It was a tough time for, literally everybody. And so I was writing them very much in the heat of what was happening. And one of the things I knew, even as I was doing it, once I realized that there was an audience, which is to say somebody out there reading, anybody out there reading, was that even in those moments while I was trying to make sense of what was happening to me, that the poems were not just for me. And because of that, they couldn't just be screeds and rants and self-pity. Although I wrote a lot of those, a lot of those. But what I wanted, both for myself primarily, but for other people too, especially in that moment, was to also acknowledge the humor, and to also acknowledge that there were really beautiful moments along the way, and also acknowledge the incredible feeling of, for me, there was an almost ecstasy in that time of being so clear about what I was here to do. I was here to connect with the people who are close to me, and I was here to write a poem, and if I only had 12 more months on Earth, those were the 2 things I was going to do. By God, I was going to finish this book, and it would, and regardless, I guess, whether it remains in print or not, still the book in a certain way always outlives you, So how do you give the best of yourself? And how do you literally hand somebody a book and say, read this, it's about cancer? Who wants to read? No, you have to be like, but it's funny, but it's kind of sexy in places. You know what I mean? Which is not to say that, there isn't a time and place to acknowledge pure devastation. And I think I try to do that honestly in several poems through the book, but I also appreciate that throughout there has to be breaks. You need a break. I needed a break. Everybody needs a break. So I, at a certain point, put a bunch of poems up on the wall. I acknowledged all the points where the darker poems were, and I literally was trying to intersperse with lighter pieces on the way. So I thought very carefully about, I used color coding, and I wanted like 2 light pieces for every very dark piece, things like that. So there was a lot of thought about how to create space. And also because without space, the drama of the darkness cannot make an impact at a certain point. At a certain point, you just shut down and it rolls right off. You know what I mean? So you need both. You need the contrast.
Yeah, but you're really talking about in some ways a stone, and you're beautifully talking about it, and also composition. Music without moments of silence in it is just continuous noise. It is silence inside music that makes rhythms happen, right?
I hate the word tone. I have to think texture because tone means absolutely nothing to me, but I can find the metaphor of texture. There are some that are heavy in the hand and some that are lighter weight, like that to me. I can
Welcome to our marriage.
Yeah. Stop talking about tone.
I'm going to just remind you, if you have...
The other argument we have is about Chekhov.
If you have questions, please write them on the cards, and they'll be collected and brought up this way, and then I'll read them and then share them with both of you. So this is the second anniversary of the occupation of Ukraine. So we can't not talk about that with Deaf Republic. So I wanted to ask a little bit about poets as witnesses and prophets. So you wrote Deaf Republic before this invasion. And now with Navalny's death and the tussle over his body, I mean, you know, I see Picha, that shooting just overlaid right on it. So what do you think of that work now on this second anniversary? Do you feel, I mean, it feels timeless in a way, but wow, this is happening. It's happening right now.
Yeah, it's happening right now. I think that's like this happen always. The question is when it happens to you. The book took a long time to finish, partly because, and I spoke a little bit about that to students the other day, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but I don't make up a different answer in 24 hours, you know. The book is written by somebody who was an immigrant or a refugee, coming from the fellow part of USSR to the United States. Now, I don't know if there is anybody in this room who had an experience of USSR. But if you did, you might remember that growing up, we had all those images of, on TV, the whole TV shows about homelessness in America. And we laughed. We thought it was propaganda. And then we arrived in America. So the book is about experience of somebody who comes from literally a falling apart empire and empire who quote unquote won. And sees surprisingly so many similar images. And is unable to make sense of what is happening. And it took me a long time to finish the book, simply because I knew that I needed to be honest to that experience of a person who is 1 foot in one place, which is former USSR, current Ukraine, the city of Odessa, and another foot at that time in San Diego, California, 9 miles from the border is where Katie and I live at our first place together. And you know what happens in the border in the United States. The children are in cages on the border in the United States. How do you reconcile that with the images of violence in childhood? How do you write a book that is true to both experiences? And that was a challenge for me as a writer. And as I told the students yesterday, I needed to find a genre, and a genre for me was that of fabulism, a fairy tale, because fairy tale is something that speaks across boundaries. You can read a fairy tale from another country, and it feels absolutely true to your experience as a child. It's also something that casts a spell, which I was interested in because I grew up in a Jewish family where fabulism was important. Having said that, of course the war in Ukraine is happening right now, but my friends, it has been happening for 10 years. We just didn't pay attention. I mean, 10 years ago, the whole peninsula of Crimea was stolen. Who paid attention? When I was leaving USSR, right about 2 years before we left, Putin wasn't even a president of the Russian Federation. There was another president, Yeltsin. 2 hours from where we lived in the Republic of Moldova, airplanes bombed high schools. I wrote about it in my first book, but people thought it was a fairy tale. Okay. What am I supposed to say? You know, the word witness is a complicated word. I'm not going to sit here and claim to be a witness. My family lives in Odessa. I'm not witnessing them. They're my family. Witness puts you at a certain remove and makes you a very serious person. I'm not a serious person. I'm going to tell 7 jokes in 1 sentence. What I want to tell you is when we here in the United States act like we are in a Mount Olympus, overseeing trouble in the rest of the world, that is not witness. When we talk about Ukraine and say doom, 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 horror, 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 that's not witness either. That's one-sided witness. We gotta honor people who survive. We gotta acknowledge the fact that they have a right to have birthday parties and go to restaurants and make jokes, despite the horror that happens. We also gotta acknowledge what is happening in our country. We can't just say, oh, I'm putting a witness mask on my face. I'm witnessing the fact that there is a dead kid in the middle of my country. It's in the middle of your own country, for God's sake. Okay.
So I'm going to go to some of the questions from our audience. This one is for you, Ilya. Would you ever see a play adaptation of Deaf Republic?
Sure, I would say that if you want it, you can have it. I'm probably not going to be involved, simply because I translate myself, and I think that adaptations or translation becomes... We have great translators in the room here right now. Ellen Dora Watson sitting right here, who translated one of the best living poets, Delia Prada. Thank you. As you know, translation is you basically become that poet in a different language. It's kind of fiction, but you try to make that fiction true. So I don't really try to compare every word or say it should be like that. It's your art, go do it.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see, a question for each of you from... let's see, for you, Ilya, in Dancing in Odessa, you have conversations with dead authors. How did you go about writing those conversations? And then there's also a question for you, Katie, here.
Well, I guess I'm lucky to be in conversation with a living author in my home. With dead authors, number one, that book was written by a 21-year-old kid. So cut him some slack. But it's good to remain 21-year-old, so I'm going to put that hat on and try to answer the question. At that time, I thought that the dead authors should not be on a pedestal in bronze. They should be like cats and dogs in your house. You should play with them. You should make them feel alive again. Otherwise, you make them even more dead.
You said at that time that's how you felt. Do you now feel like they should be bronzed?
No, not necessarily, but maybe 21-year-old poet should be a little more humble.
Okay. My question is, how do I pick my poem names? This is a really good question because I find poem names very difficult. My favorite thing to do, and it doesn't always work, is to read the poem and try to find a line or a part of a line, especially an unexpected part, and create a poem title that way. So, for instance, Emeloma was my concept, right, of the book where Emily Dickinson crashed against cancer. Conceptually, fine. As a title, terrible. Like to go back in and sort of use the things of the book, which is to say the literal words that are there, for me always works much better than using a concept of a title, if that makes sense. And part of that is because, for better or worse, I don't know what I'm going to write most of the time. Like I'm often just sort of like I'm half conscious and I'm trying as much as possible, though, to open the door and let the part of me that is not thinking do the writing. That part of me that is not thinking should not do the editing, ever. But she can be a really surprising and fascinating writer. Terrible editor, though. But a good namer of poems.
I think for both of us in our practice, we would say that the community, the writing community, is very important. Simply somebody who would tell you, okay, stop and consider this, and that. And it's an amazing thing that you guys have, so many of you in college now. Pay attention, some of the folks in the room might end up being your friends still, 30 years later, and telling you the truth of what to be and not to be, and do and not to do, and what are other options.
And sometimes the people who are your best readers are not your friends, which is not to say you can't be friendly. But, I have people that I trade work with, and we do not talk about any other parts of our lives. People I've traded work with for a long, long time. We're not friends, but we're good readers of each other's work. So that can also be a valuable thing to think about. I don't know, because I'd never really thought that until it happened. I thought we had to be close, but oftentimes the closest people are much too nice.
Well, we have so many wonderful questions, and I think we have time maybe just for a couple more. Here's one that I have a particular interest in this question because I had one a little bit like it. In Deaf Republic, silence seems to be a multifaceted symbol. On the one hand, it is how the townspeople resist oppression. On the other hand, it signals complicity. The townspeople remain silent as they watch their compatriots like Alfonso die. How do you reconcile these two uses of silence? And if I can tack on something of my own, is silence quiet and deafness different or the same?
Thank you. I think I got the question. I would say in the book there are at least 5 or 7, depending on how you read it, different definitions of silence. And I don't pretend to settle on one, simply because in one lives, according to Shakespeare, there are at least 7 definitions of silence, 7 stages, right? For example, there is a silence of a person being silenced at the verb. There is a silence between 2 lovers when the language is not necessary. I say, and you say, or you say, more likely. And so forth and so on. And we can keep talking for the next hour without saying a word. Then there is a metaphysical silence. Most of our religions, most of our metaphysicians will tell us things like the silence of God is God, a great statement, right? But then there is silence that deaf people with a capital T, the nation of deaf people, the culture of deaf people, would tell you simply doesn't exist. Because deaf people don't believe in silence. In writing of this book, I have asked many deaf writers to believe in silence. Not a single one said yes. And now think about it. There are at least 7% of people on this planet who happen to be deaf or hard of hearing. So if 7% of people on this planet do not believe in silence, what does it tell us about our metaphysics, our religion, our philosophy, which takes so much of conversation on the concept of silence? I think of silence as a kind of a metaphor that is too large so it breaks up. It's like an umbrella, a lovely big umbrella that's trying to keep rain falling from everybody in this room. And it doesn't quite hold up. Then there is the concept of disability studies. A great contemporary disability scholar, Rosemary Garland Thompson, say the disabled body should move from the realm of the hospital room into the realm of political minority. And you may think, oh, great, very good for disability studies, hooray. And then what happens? Pandemic happens. And you're all in that hospital room. All of you. But some of you don't have health insurance. And you realize, whoa, that's not just disability studies, that is humankind studies. Okay. So there are many, many ways we can approach that.
Thank you. Perhaps one last question is about, it sort of goes back to the subject matter of your work, at least in these two books. And the question has to do with that they are very personal topics, and how do you decide what to talk about and what to keep to yourself? Is it, case by case? Is there a principle?
The principle is it a good poem? I have a poem in this book about hemorrhoid. My hemorrhoid, I suppose I should own that.
Are you saying it's not the speaker?
It's not the speaker of the poem, no. I've written many poems about Ilya in sometimes in very unflattering lights, mostly comically, not actually unflattering as a person. And he, bless him, one of the greatest things about being married to another poet is, to show him that work where, it's like you're dancing around naked and all your bits are flopping about. And, it's, for some people would be embarrassing, and he would be like, he's a good poem. That is, at least in our house, the most fundamental question is it functioning as a piece of art? If it is, then it is welcome to go in. If it is not, no matter how well portrayed any given thing might be, no matter how flattering it is or whatever, if it's not a poem, then it does not belong. And that we don't always agree what is a poem and what is not a poem, although usually at the end of the day we find a way to concur. So not everything has to pass through a filter either. There are poems in his work that I think are terrible, and I'm sure vice versa. That's just maybe lines.
If I may enter this conversation, and I won't speak for myself, I will just bring 3 quotes from a poet we actually met translating, Anna Akhmatova. 3 quotes, let me try to remember them. One, probably most useful for this conversation, is poetry should be shameless. Another one that might be useful, and also might be useful for some of you, and we talked about that in the classroom yesterday. Akhmatova said, you have no idea what kind of trash poetry comes from.
I have a better translation of that, sorry. You have no idea the trash from which poetry is made.
Yeah, sure.
I like that version better.
That's probably
that was mine.
An American idiom.
My translation.
And then finally, she said, and that is not just for poetry, but for life, I find it very useful advice. She said, I live for 2 things in life: gossip and metaphysics.
That's the perfect way to end.